Big beautiful bill, meet big beautiful temporary restraining order issued by Judge Talwani in Massachusetts in favor of Planned Parenthood against the Trump administration and against effectively Congress and its budget bill, because the budget bill contained a defunding mechanism to uncouple, cut off the umbilical cord between Medicaid and Planned Parenthood, meaning they'd have to shut 200 of their counseling centers, putting 2.1 million people who obtain cancer screening, sexually transmitted disease screening, and birth control from Planned Parenthood, putting them effectively out in the cold. So, under the Supreme Court decision from 10 days ago, the Planned Parenthood would have a difficult argument, because under that argument, Planned Parenthood was told by the Supreme Court, well, we know that South Carolina is defunding you, but you don't have an ability to sue under the Medicaid statute because Congress never gave individuals or firms or public interest groups like Planned Parenthood the ability to sue under the Medicaid statute. Forget all that. The new strategy is this is a First Amendment violation of freedom of association. I want to hang out with people that want to hang out with me, like at Planned Parenthood. Freedom of speech, because they're being targeted for giving counseling that's inconsistent with the Christian values, apparently, of the Trump administration. That's a First Amendment violation. And Fifth Amendment equal protection under the law violation. See, forget suing under the Medicaid statute. That's so 10 days ago under the Supreme Court decision in Medina. This is today. Let's look at the bill that just got passed. They're all excited in MAGA world. Oh, the bill got passed. Yeah. Well, now it has a defunding mechanism that allows the Planned Parenthood to go into federal court and get a beautiful temporary restraining order. I'm going to break it all down for you. Popok on the road. Right here on Legal AF. All right. First, let me burst some misconceptions. I doubt it's part of our audience zen or frame of mind, but I want it out there. Planned Parenthood does not provide abortions. Let me repeat that. Planned Parenthood does not provide abortion services. Planned Parenthood provides abortion and other reproductive rights counseling. It counsels on those issues. It does provide sexually transmitted and infectious disease screening. It provides birth control to millions and millions of women and men as well. It also provides counseling and other types of cancer screening. As part of its portfolio, it does counsel all the way up through abortion in states where it is legal. And in 90% of the states where Planned Parenthood operates, it is legal. So let's get out of the whole, when you're faced with the canard, with the lie in your debate on the street, around your kitchen table, where in social media, wherever you are, Planned Parenthood does not provide abortions. Okay, now that we got that straight, let's turn to the case. 10 days ago, I reported on a case coming out of the Supreme Court called Medina, in which the Supreme Court allowed the South Carolina to effectively uncouple Planned Parenthood in South Carolina from Medicaid funding. Planned Parenthood sued under the Medicaid statutes, and the Supreme Court said, you don't have standing to be in court. Medicaid said, excuse me, we went through a whole court proceeding. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed us twice. What do you mean we don't have standing? Well, Supreme Court 6-3 MAGA majority said, including Amy Coney Barrett, Medicaid statutes, we've looked high and low. There's no provision in there that says you can go into court and sue, and we don't think the way that you've brought your case is proper. So you might have an argument, but you're the wrong party to bring it, and there may not be any relief for what you're seeking. In other words, no party can seek any relief. So there's the door. Sorry. So that was a setback, of course, for Planned Parenthood. But they look carefully at this 900-page bill, and in there, buried in this bill, this now budget that was just passed by the MAGA in Congress, the House and the Senate, was a defunding mechanism to cut off and particularly target groups like Planned Parenthood. It was almost created and calculated and aimed directly at Planned Parenthood. It said, well, if you got X amount of dollars in 2023 from Medicaid, and you are and then they actually used the phrase, if you are they didn't say targeted group, but they had a phrase very similar to it. They said, if you're in this group, and we don't like your policies or essentially your viewpoint, your First Amendment expression, your freedom of association, which is also part of the First Amendment, then we're cutting you off. And the irreparable harm that was alleged in Planned Parenthood's papers in a case that was assigned to Judge Indira Talwani, who was appointed by Barack Obama up in Massachusetts. In there, they said, look, if we lose this Medicaid funding, we're going to have to close 200 of our centers. That's more than a third of the centers. 2.1 million people will no longer be able to get low-cost birth control, cancer screening, sexually transmitted disease screening, and the rest. And those centers operate 90%. 90% of them operate in places where the abortion is legal. So the fact that that's part of our counseling, we don't see the problem. And the way they framed their emergency motion for temporary restraining order, which has now been granted, is to say, we have the freedom of association under the First Amendment. We have First Amendment speech and viewpoint speech. And you're aiming at us because you don't like how we're counseling or what we're counseling. And you can't target us that way without violating that and the Equal Protection Clause of the Fifth Amendment. I think it's a great argument. I think it was well pled, well done, well argued. And so did Judge Talwani. She granted, let me read to you from, and I'll post this up on Substack as well for Legal AF. Here's what Judge Talwani had to say. Very succinct and to the point. July 7th, temporary restraining order. She said, upon consideration of plaintiff's emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction, it is hereby ordered that defendants, that's the Department of Health and Human Services, that is the parent entity for Medicare and Medicaid, that they are enjoined from enforcing Section 7113 of an act to provide for reconciliation. That's the passage of the approval of the bill, the big ugly bill that we've talked about. And they are also enjoined to take all steps necessary to ensure that Medicaid funding continues to be dispersed in the customary manner and timeframes the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and its members, including in Massachusetts and Utah. They're ordering the Trump administration to respond within 96 hours of this order in a status report, and then file their brief in 2 weeks. And about why this order should not be further continued. Now, some people here on this hot take might be thinking, well, what about nationwide injunctions, which the United States Supreme Court ruled could not be used in most situations by a federal judge to go after the Trump administration or any administration? Well, Judge Talwani solved the problem. This is not a nationwide injunction. This is a injunction in favor of the parties in front of her. And the parties in front of her are Planned Parenthood Federation and of Massachusetts and of Utah. And so on their behalf, she is blocking Medicare and Medicaid because of the defunding bill from defunding Planned Parenthood until she can get her arms and mind around the rest of the case. But she already thinks that they've satisfied that they're likely to succeed on the merits of showing the constitutional violation, that they're likely to show irreparable harm. I've outlined that for you. The injury and damage to more than 2 million people, mostly women. 3, that they've shown an inadequate remedy at law. They need this temporary restraining order in order to protect themselves because they could go out of business, which is what Donald Trump wants to do if they don't get this relief, and the public interest points in their favor. So, lastly, as I'm doing sort of a teachable moment here on this Legal AF update, Legal AF hot take, is a fundamental question, because I don't want it to be counterintuitive. I want you to understand it. Can a person, an entity, sue when Congress makes an act? Yes. Congressional statutes and acts and bills may be declared unconstitutional if, in doing so, they violate rights that are established and enshrined in the Constitution. Happens all the time, not as much with this particular lineup of the United States Supreme Court, but it happens all the time in our history. For example, if in the and we had this already in the 1940s, in the 1950s, if we had a law on the books that targeted people who were German Americans or Japanese Americans and tried to put them in concentration camps, could that also be found to be a violation of constitutional rights and be reversed? And the answer to that is yes. So I think this is on very good jurisprudential footing. We'll continue to follow the case. There's some updates that'll happen in the meantime. There's an opposition paper that's due in 2 weeks from the Trump administration. And then Any result of that will end up at the First Circuit Court of Appeals before Donald Trump can take it on an emergency application up to the United States Supreme Court, which we know he will do because he's doing quite well at the United States Supreme Court on these issues. But now they're going to have to decide if a temporary restraining order is appropriate to protect Planned Parenthood from being targeted and put out of business by the Trump administration, which is one of their obvious goals, especially when you read Project 2025 and any of the teachings of the Heritage Foundation. They see Planned Parenthood as their enemy, and they want to crush it. And we're not going to let it here on Legal AF. Hit the free subscribe button. Continue to follow us. We don't have a paywall. We just need subscriptions. We just need you going over to Legal AF Substack and subscribing there as well, and supporting our podcast, Legal AF, on the Midas Touch Network. So till my next report, I'm Michael Popok. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.